Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
In today's episode 279, we talk with Hannah James about her recent 5,000 kilometre journey down the east coast of Australia, a journey that came to be known as the Long Way South. This is one hell of a story, so strap yourselves in. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published, and if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Australia has some well-known long-distance trails, but it never ceases to amaze me what some people create when they think outside the box. When hiker Hannah James decided to do the 5,300 kilometre national trail to raise money for the Black Dog Institute, part of the way through she decided she didn't want to spend so much time away from the coastline and out of all the amazing national parks along the way. So instead she did a choose your own adventure walk, putting together what sounds like an amazing adventure. In this episode, we catch up with Hannah to find out all about her adventure as well as her fundraising efforts. So Hannah, thanks for taking the time to chat with Australian Hiker about this epic journey.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim.
Now, before we discuss your trip, can you give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Hannah. I live in Brisbane with my partner, Dan. I work in software.
And what about your hiking history? I mean, just launching into this trip we're just about to talk about. How did you get there, and when did you start hiking, and what led to this trip we're just about to talk about?
Yeah, so I did some hiking as a child overseas, and hadn't done any hiking in Australia until I went down to Tasmania. I did the overland track, and then went off into Pine Valley to do the Acropolis mountain range as well. And that's when I really fell in love with hiking in Australia, just realizing how varied the landscapes were. From there, really started getting into through hiking. So went over to Western Australia, did the Bib, did the Hyson Trail in South Australia, lots of climbs of the Glasshouse Mountains here in Queensland, and the Great North Walk. I just really fell in love with the, seeing Australia at walking speed. I think people spend a lot of time driving from place to place, but it's incredible what you can find when you slow things down. So that's really what drew me to through hiking, and then drew me towards walking the entire East Coast.
Now that begs the question: given all the amazing walks that you have done, how do you manage to get all the time away from work, and for that matter, your partner?
Great question. My work was really good. I sort of approached them about a year out and said, I want to go do this walk. And they said, okay, sure. I said, should I put in my resignation? And they, graciously said, actually, do you want to just save up some annual leave, and do you want to purchase some annual leave, and you can stay employed while you're away, and we'll have some projects waiting for you when you get back. With my partner, it was a lot more difficult. Missed him, greatly, but I was lucky enough that he came out and met me a couple of times on trail. We got to spend some time together up at Yeppoon and then down in Sydney, and he came and met me at the end as well. So thankfully, we've got some great services. Like the Garmin InReach, so I was able to send him messages throughout the day. But yeah, it was pretty hard to spend 7 months away. It was really nice to come home.
That's always the issue I tend to have. I've got to build a story in advance of telling my wife this is what I want to do, and even doing sort of 4 to 5 weeks away is it's got to be a mutual discussion about when and how it's going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it took quite a long time to plan this. So he he knew that I was planning to go and do, a big hike. So, he sort of had about 2 years to prepare for that. And I think when I, finally said, okay, yeah, I'm leaving in in May next year, it was like, oh, right, okay, yeah, this is actually happening.
Now let's talk about your trip, which came to be known as the Long Way South. How did you decide that you were going to walk the National Trail, which was formerly known as the Bicentennial National Trail, and what were your goals for this trip?
Yeah, so I heard about the Bicentennial National Trail years ago. I believe I was actually in Tasmania on that first through hike when somebody mentioned that it was the longest continuous trail in Australia. So I had sort of looked into it and gone, yeah, maybe one day, pipe dream. And sort of really started looking into it a couple of years ago. And realized that, there'd only been sort of 5 people that had walked it from end to end. And, initially I was like, God, how cool would it be to be, the first woman to walk it from end to end? But, as I guess some of your listeners will find out, that didn't end up, happening that way. But I just really wanted to, challenge myself. I wanted to go to those places that, I hadn't yet been to. I think a lot of people leave their home country as the last place that they travel. And so, they're typically older and they can't get to those like hard to reach places. They can't reach those mountaintops. So why not do it now and do the rest of the world later?
Okay. And I believe you're also doing some fundraising as well?
Yeah, that's right. I decided that I would, join my love of hiking with raising money for the Black Dog Institute. They're really important to me. I've gone through my own mental health struggles, and having lost someone to suicide, I thought that it would be, a great way to get people involved in fundraising and also, chatting with people to, start having those difficult conversations. I always find that walking with someone really encourages, the conversation to flow. And you can have those difficult conversations when walking side by side with someone. Puts you on equal footing. You don't have to make eye contact. And for me, I think the COVID pandemic really, brought into focus the importance of mental health. So really raising money for the Black Dog Institute is just so important for me. They're Australia's only, medical research institution. So, they're really data driven and looking at new ways to, work with people who have mental health conditions and innovating in that space. So for me, them working on a process where it's, not a one size fits all process is important to me.
Now, it's the end of 2023, and I believe your fundraising page is still active. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's correct. So unfortunately, I had to skip a couple sections on my trail due to either, fires, flooding, or feral animal control. So I'm going to continue to fill in those little gaps over the coming months, and the fundraising page will be open until then.
And we'll go through and put the link to that on the show notes for this website. So if you're interested in helping out and donating to the Black Dog Institute, you'll be able to find the link on the show notes. Okay, now a trip of this size, and we are talking a trip over 5,000 kilometres in length. What was your planning process like prior to starting?
Yeah. So like I said before, it did take about 2 years to plan. I drew all my own digital maps, and then had spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets, planning out, individual days and where to get water, where the nearest town was for resupplies, things like that. So that did take quite a long time to do. But basically just working out, how am I actually going to be able to do this? If there's a day where it's, 1,500 meters elevation gain, how far do I realistically want to walk on that day? How much food do I need to carry? How much water do I need to carry? So working all of that out in advance really, help reduce the, anxiety on trail of, sort of not really knowing what the day was going to bring. So yeah, lots of planning. And then I also made a lot of my own food. So lots of dehydrating of everything that you could possibly dehydrate. Had a couple failed experiments there, but overall it was all pretty tasty. I don't think I'll be eating porridge for the rest of my life. But yeah, making sure that I had, adequate nutrition while I was on trail was important as well.
I must admit, I do love porridge, and I do make overnight oats for a lot of my trips. But there comes a time where it's like I've had enough. So I don't know how you managed to cope with that for an extended trip like you did.
Yeah, I think the final morning I took a photo of my porridge, just as a homage to I've eaten this for 100 and something days, and I never have to eat it again. So yeah, there definitely was a couple points where did get quite sick of the food that I was eating after such a long journey. But at the end of the day, it's fuel. So
all right, well we'll stay with the subject of food. So you talked about you made some of your own or dehydrated some of your own food. What was the resupply option like? Were you mailing boxes ahead of you or picking them up ahead of you, or were you doing a mix of buying from shops? What was the plan there?
Yeah, it was a bit of a mixture. In Far North Queensland, I was pretty limited to sort of what was in towns. Oftentimes, they only had a very small general store with very limited supplies. So I had made enough food and packed up enough food basically for the entire journey. And those were all in boxes in our living room. And my beautiful partner would get a text message from me saying, okay, post the next box to the next town. And he'd call up either the hotel that I was planning to stay at or the post office to see if he could ship it there. And I'd come into town and pick it up, go through it. If I needed anything extra, I was normally able to, pick that up either at these, the little general stores or sometimes, buying some stuff from the hotel as well. So some fresh fruit and things like that. So yeah, mainly it was posted to me.
I was going to say, how many days of food were you carrying at a time?
It really varied. I think the biggest section was probably 8 days, so not a huge amount of food. Because I was traveling sort of big distances every day, I sort of could manage to only have to carry 8 days worth of food. I really did try to, minimize my pack weight so that I could travel further and, therefore not have to carry as much food.
Now, you talked about big distances. What was your average distance, I suppose, over the duration of the trip, and how did you plan out how many kilometres you were doing a day?
Yeah, so the average was around 38, 39 kilometres a day. Some days obviously were way bigger than that. I think 50 kilometres was my biggest day. And then I had a couple really short days in there as well when it's just, the last hop, skip and jump into town for a beer. Basically, the distances were dictated by where water was. So, you'd sort of plan to hike to where, there's a river or there's a dam. Up in Far North Queensland, it was, where is there a water tank or a cattle trough that I can drink from? So, but those plans, the rivers can sometimes be dry, so you'll carry on walking. But yeah, it really was dictated by where is there water. Even further south in the Alps, I wanted to be close to a water source and not have to carry a heap of water with me, up the side of a mountain, late in the afternoon. So, yeah.
Now, 39 kilometres is an average. I mean, were you used to doing that before this trip, or it was just that I was pushing what you were used to?
Yeah, so in previous hikes, I had done some, big kilometres, but typically I was able to sort of take a bit more time each day, so I could walk shorter distances. But yeah, this, I think, doing, those sorts of distances every single day, that was, pretty challenging. But, in getting ready for this hike, I did a lot of, strength work. So I did a lot of Pilates for my, my core, my back strength, my, lower body strength. It's quite difficult to get into shape to walk, nearly a marathon with a pack on, unless you're actually doing it every day. So in the beginning, I started with some shorter distances, so sort of doing 30 to 34 kilometers a day, which was great because it was so hot and humid up in Far North Queensland. I got to finish the day, sitting in a pool or by a river, cool down. But yeah, as I got further south, those distances got easier. It's just your body gets used to it, you get into a really good rhythm.
Now, you also mentioned water as well. Were you filtering your water?
Yeah, 100% filtering my water. Often it was, occasionally there was cattle troughs that I was drinking out of. So, definitely filtering my water there. There was also, rivers that had gone through old gold mining areas up in far north Queensland. So I was warned about arsenic being in the water. So, I was really careful about filtering away water. Unfortunately, I did get sick a couple times, and sort of was assumed that it was probably from the water. Even with filtering, you can sometimes, pick things up that are on the outside of your water bottle. So I definitely got very, intense about finding clean water sources and filtering that water.
Now, what were you using to filter?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I had a Grail, but unfortunately it failed after filtering only 18 litres of water, not the advertised 250 litres of water. So I thankfully was able to get a lift into Cairns and pick up the Katadyn water filters. So they work great. So it's just the pouch with the water filter, and you squeeze the pouch to get the water out. Comes out pretty clean.
Yeah, we use one of those. We've got a 600 ml size one of those that we use to, in most cases, to filter our water. The gravity feeds work well for bigger groups if you're doing bigger water carries. But it's I've gotten so used to filtering water, even when it looks clear, it may not be. So
100%. Yeah, I completely agree. I think you'll often find that the clearest water, there's probably something upriver, a Brumby, for example. And, it's when you least expect it that you're going to get something nasty. So,
all right. Now, we've talked about water filters. What were the main pieces of gear? So I suppose your big three, your tent, your pack, and your sleeping bag. And was there anything else special that you also had on this trip that a normal hiker wouldn't have?
So yeah, I guess, definitely the big three. I guess the only extra pieces of equipment that I bought was a drone, which I found really useful for checking out, water sources that were off trail. So if I needed to, hike a kilometre off trail, I was able to send my drone up to actually check that the river had water in it. So that was pretty useful. It was also pretty useful to figure out where fires were as well. So I got some great footage too. My pack is a Osprey Lumina, so a 60-litre pack.
And that's one of their ultralight packs, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, it's a great pack. I did the Hyson with it as well. And I think it's just survived this hike. It's very much looking a bit worse for wear. But yeah, the fact that it was, I was able to carry quite significant weight with it and be comfortable. It's, pretty perfect pack. My tent is a Big Agnes copper spur. It's a 2-man tent. I'm one for being able to sit up comfortably in my tent and have my pack in there with me. It's spread out a little bit, so that was great. And it needs to have a couple repairs done to it, but it's still definitely one of my favorite tents. In terms of sleeping bags, I used a Spark 2 for the northern sections, and then I switched over to a Helium 600.
Okay.
Yeah, for those colder sections. It kept sort of snowing in the Alps before I got there, so I decided to switch out to something much warmer.
And are you a tracking pole user as well?
100%. I am unfortunately very uncoordinated and clumsy, so those hiking poles have saved my life more times than once. So I've got the Compodel Carbon C3s, and they're great. They've lasted the entire trip and are a really good hiking pole.
Time frame, if you're looking at doing those sort of big distances, and we're talking about roughly over 5,300 odd kilometres roughly. How long did you expect to take this trip, and how long did it actually take you to do it?
Yeah, so I left Cooktown on the 6th of May, and I finished in Healesville on the 18th of November. Initially, I planned to finish on October 21st, my birthday. I thought that would be a a fun, little party to have, finish this Great War, turn 32. But unfortunately, due to some illness and injuries, sort of sections being closed off due to, fires or aerial shooting, I had to change my plans a little bit and ended up finishing a little bit later than expected. I've still got, a couple 100 Ks left to do, sort of near Brisbane and south of Sydney. But those ones, I'm looking forward to sort of smashing those ones out, finishing off my little map that I've drawn.
How many days was it all up?
So I think in total, including all the, resting and recovering, was I think 196 days. But it was about 120 days on trail.
That's still a pretty good pace to be setting to cover that sort of distance, particularly day in, day out.
Yeah. It some days you definitely felt every single kilometre that you did. So
you had originally planned to walk the National Trail or the Bicentennial National Trail, but this changed. Why was that?
After my first sort of 1,000 kilometres on the trail, I really started to realise that there was just going to be a lot of road walking. And while I was walking through cattle stations, that was totally fine. I didn't mind it, but I did start ending up on a number of highways, so the Bruce Highway included. So just having to, walk along the side of a highway where there's big road trains going by, it just really didn't fit in with my goal of, focusing on mental health. This whole journey had been about, raising money for Black Dog Institute and really talking about, the importance of looking out for your mental health. And I realized that, pushing myself to do the trail just because the trail, was there, it wasn't serving my own mental health. So I decided that I was going to get to Biggenden, so inland from Hervey Bay, and then I was going to go to the coast and walk some of those beautiful coastal tracks over there.
And I believe that was the pattern as you continued south. You did come back onto the National Trail from time to time, but you also then went off and did other areas as well?
Yeah, that's right. So I jumped back onto the National Trail at the Queensland-New South Wales border and followed that to near Dorrigo. And then from there, I jumped into sort of national parks, state forests, and sort of zigzagged my way down the east coast and then popped out back on the coast again to walk in Mile Lakes National Park down to Newcastle. And then I jumped on the Great North Walk to Sydney. And then from there, sort of zigzagged across the National Trail while I was on the Alpine walking track, and then finished on the National Trail again. So following those trails down into Healesville.
I mean, this is, I think, I suppose, one of the issues with the National Trail. It really was designed as a horse rider's trail, even though cyclists and bushwalkers can do it as well. But as a result, it tends to push you out of the national parks, which don't like horses in them.
That's right, yeah.
But as a result of that, it means it also pushes you out of some of the really spectacular scenery as well.
It does. Yeah, I started realizing that there was, beautiful national parks sort of only 30 kilometers, to either side of me. And here I am walking along a major highway. So it, really that's sort of when I decided, okay, you know what, I'm going to leave the National Trail. I can come back and do other sections of it that I like, but I want to get back to, real hiking. I want to walk on some single track. I want to, be surrounded by wildlife and get away from all these, noisy cars.
Yeah, no, I can completely understand that. Did you manage to be able to link or mainly stay on green space, I suppose, or did you have to do some road walking as you cross from one national park to the next?
Yeah, there was a bit of road walking between the national parks. In northern New South Wales, fortunately, those distances were pretty small. So that was really, really nice. It sort of would maybe be a day's worth of walking between those national parks. And typically they were in sort of along management trails or sort of small roads through, big properties. So there was a lot less traffic. But yeah, linking all those national parks up, it was a bit of a challenge, but tried to minimize the amount of road walking that I would be doing.
Yeah, no, completely understandable there. And I think, you mentioned prior to this, you also, went into the Australian Alps walking track and the Great North Walk. And I think being able to pick those sort of areas rather than just bypassing it for the sake of it is a good move.
Yeah, that's right. The National Trail offers some alternate routes for people that are on bikes or with horses if they want to, avoid some of the mountainous areas. And those were my favorite areas. So, Crumbit Tops, right up there with all these like big Sydney gums and just spectacular views, to Guy Fawkes National Park. I know a lot of the cyclists, you really can't realistically take a bike through that area, but it was, it's a stunning section, and the National Trail is so lucky that the national park allows horses to ride through those areas, because you're just following the Guy Fawkes River and the Boyd River through these incredible canyons, and so those sorts of areas really invigorated me, and maybe those sections I loved on the National Trail, but I wanted more of that. So that's basically my plan. Was from there, I just want to be in these beautiful places surrounded by nature.
Now, that sort of raises a question in regard to planning. You've gone through and spent all this time planning and setting out a route and creating your own route. What happens when you say, okay, look, I'm going to go off what I originally planned and I'll start going through these national parks? Did you have to do much stop and do much planning there, or you just managed to be able to pick up on existing trails that ran through those parks?
Yeah, so there was quite a lot of planning involved. Unfortunately and fortunately, when I got to Brisbane, I actually got sick. So I had 3 weeks at home to spend planning before I was given the okay to go back on trail. So I used that time to really, redraw my maps, make sure that I was going to be able to get resupplies, because I had then decided to go to sort of more remote areas. I, reached out to people that I knew on the Central Coast to see if they were able to drive packages out to me on the sides of highways. So really grateful to, my friends and family who came out and met me on trail and bought me food and all sorts of things. So yeah, without them, it just would have been really difficult to sort of have to, leave trail, hike or hitch into a town, pray that my resupply had arrived in time for me to pick it up, and then try to get back to the trail. So I was really lucky to have people who were willing to come out to trail, drive for several hours to meet me, bring me my resupplies.
I think that's always the thing. It's sort of, it's okay if you walk past towns every sort of 5, 6, 10 days sort of thing. But when as you say, when you're in a remote area and you've got to carry everything, it changes the logistics quite a lot.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, even saying, I'm doing these big kilometers every day, I'm actually quite a lazy hiker. I like my pack to be quite light. So the less food I have to carry, the lighter my pack is. So having a resupply sort of every 7 days, 5 to 7 days, made it much easier.
Now, you mentioned pack weight there. What was your typical pack weight throughout the trip?
And so that's an interesting question. I don't actually know. I believe that my base weight was around 7.5 kilos at the start, so quite light. But I did have some gear changes along the way, so that weight sort of changed quite a bit. And as I got into colder areas, I was carrying more warm gear with me as well. I think my typical pack weight was probably around 18 kilos, full of food and water. As I got further south, water was more available and I didn't have to carry as much. I think it's a couple of days where I had to carry 6.5 liters of water, and that still didn't last me till I got to camp. So that makes for a really heavy pack.
I also believe you did some side trips or a side trip. Now, what was that?
Yeah, so I decided when I got to Biggenden that I would head over to Gari and hike the Great Walk over there. It had been a dream of my parents when we moved to Australia that we would go over and would do the Great Walk at Gari. And they just had never done it. I think they thought the logistics of it were quite difficult. They weren't too sure, where the water was. Did you need somebody driving a car to carry, supplies to you? And obviously the concern about wildlife and how all that worked. So I gave them a call and said, if you guys can make it up and pick me up in Biggenden, I'll take you over to Gari and we can do the Great Walk over there. So it was a lovely break from having to do big kilometres every day. I, planned around what their abilities were, and we did between sort of 6 and 16 kilometres a day along that trail. So taking 6 days from start to finish, and stayed in some absolutely gorgeous places. It was just, one of the highlights of the entire journey, spending that time walking through these beautiful, big old forests, and seeing all these beautiful lakes.
Now, many people may not be familiar with the name Gari, and that's actually the Indigenous name for what used to be called Fraser Island. It's now been renamed back to its Indigenous name again. But I know you've said the same thing, that when you talk to people about Gari, it's sort of you get a blank look on their face.
That's right.
And as soon as you say Fraser Island, they know what you're talking about.
I think it's a very fitting name. The name means paradise. So it really was paradise.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to that, because we're planning on doing that in 2024. So we'll see how that pans out. So what was the actual distance you ended up doing?
Yeah. So I did around 4,700 kilometres. Like I said, there's a couple sections that I unfortunately couldn't do that I'll fill in over the coming months, and that'll take me to just over 5,000 kilometres once I finish those ones up.
I know the answer to this is going to vary, but what is your typical day for a trip of that sort of length? Take us through from wake up in the morning till go to bed at night.
Yeah, so waking up in the morning, normally between 5 and 6 a.m., depending on what the sun is doing and how hot I think the day is going to be. From there, I sit in my sleeping bag and eat my porridge and drink a caffeine tablet in some water. Like I said, I'm quite a lazy hiker. I normally can't be bothered to boil water in the morning. I think I only did it 5 times the entire journey. Once I've sort of eaten and had a look at my maps for the day, I then figure out sort of how much water I need to carry to the next water source, pack up all my gear, and then head off. In the beginning, I was tracking my day on my watch, and sort of taking a break every either 8 kilometers or 2 hours of walking, whatever sort of came first. And in the beginning, that really served me in showing like, okay, yeah, I can make these distances. I sort of know roughly how far away camp is. I sort of know roughly where the next water source is based on the kilometers that I've done. Sort of towards Sydney, I actually stopped tracking everything and just really started enjoying the hike. I stopped for food pretty regularly. I was pretty hungry most days, and would sort of, my day really did revolve around, when I was going to have morning tea and second breakfast, 11sies, until, I basically would walk all day. That can range between, 12 to, I think, 16 hours of walking. And then immediately, set up my tent, get some water boiling for dinner, and I'd fall asleep pretty quickly, actually. So there wasn't a lot that happened in the evenings. Wash my face, wash my hands, my feet, and get to my sleeping bag.
Now, were you doing any night hiking at all, or pretty much once you were trying to get to camp and set up before it became black?
Yeah, I did do a little bit of night hiking in far north Queensland, particularly when it was so hot during the days and the sun was just, heating the bitumen so much that it felt like your legs were boiling. So I'd often sort of find, a shady place or a creek bed where I could sort of get some shade and have a little nap there. I did walk into darkness, quite a lot. So most days I walked until it was completely dark, but that's, for me, it's not really a worry. Got your head torch on and you get to see a lot more wildlife. That's only awake at night. So your koalas and some of your little roos. And so for me, walking at night was not really a problem. I just walk until I made it to where I wanted to camp for the night.
Did you have much trouble finding campsites, or normally, as you said, you were looking for water to a great extent, but was there typically a nice flat area that you could set your tent up in every time you put your pack down for the day?
Yeah, typically I was able to find somewhere that I could set up my tent. Whether it was flat, was pretty questionable. Normally I just looked for places where there wasn't, too many sticks or rocks and things like that. I did camp on the sides of roads or, in fields and things, after jumping some barbed wire fences. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when you've said, okay, yeah, this is far enough, it really is just about, am I going to slide to one side of my tent or not? And if the slide is minimal, then that's where the tent's going. So, quite a number of times set up in places where, I didn't think I would need to camp on the side of a road, but at the end of the day, home is where the tent is set up. So.
Were you mainly camping, or were you also staying in hotels and a commercial accommodation as well?
Yeah, so for the majority of the hike, I did sleep in my tent. I would only stay in hotels if I was, had gone into a town for a resupply. Typically, I was there for maybe 2 nights, so I had a day to get my all of my chores done. So cleaning my clothes, repairing gear, picking up food, looking at the logistics of the next part of the trail. But mostly it was in my tent. I didn't stay in sort of accommodation too often.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I mean, I said that raises a question. How was your phone signal as you were traveling? I mean, you mentioned you had a Garmin satellite communicator, but did you have reasonably good phone signal as you traveled, or you had periods where you just had nothing at all?
Yeah, it really varied. Sort of in the southern states, in Victoria, I had really good phone communication, which was awesome. But in Queensland, I think I went for a section of about 2 weeks without any phone signal. So I really did rely on my Garmin for that. But yeah, it was sort of came in and out. I don't think the 90% coverage. It must have been in all the 10% where there is no coverage for the majority of the time. So it really was quite hit and miss.
A hard question, I know, but what were the highlights of this trip?
Oh God, there's so many. I think, those really remote places. So Guy Fawkes National Park, we've been following those Brumby trails and, seeing deer through the fog in the mornings, just having that beautiful crystal clear river that I cross, 40 times a day. That was, definitely a highlight. I made a side trip up into Barrington Tops and, again, really quite remote. All the 4-wheel-drive tracks were still closed at the time that I was up there. So I really had the place to myself. All these, beautiful waterfalls, these Antarctic beech forests, these huge tree ferns as well. Absolutely stunning. And then obviously the alpine walking track. And it's really my first time in the Alps, hiking in the Alps. And I don't think I've ever said wow so many times. I think it was, every day I was excited to get up and hike. It didn't matter if there was, I was following management trail, I was following, just my compass and looking for other people's tracks through the forest. It was just spectacular up there.
I think you can become pretty blasé about seeing things that, saw that yesterday or saw that the day before, but I think it's good to be able to be amazed and to really enjoy something even if you've seen it before.
Yeah, 100%. I think, it didn't matter how many, Eastern grey roos I had seen. Every time I saw another one, I was like, oh, wow, this is spectacular. Didn't matter how many sunrises or sunsets I'd seen. Every time there was a, particularly good one, you'd stop and you'd stand and you'd watch it until, sort of finish. So I just think, how lucky am I to be able to see all this stuff in my own backyard.
Yeah, no, I think that's always the way. Now, with the trip of this magnitude, there's always going to be things that don't go to plan. So what didn't go well on this trip?
Oh, yeah. I think, the first major stressor was my Grail water filter failing. That was pretty stressful. I was, in an area where I definitely needed to have good water filtration. So that was sort of the first hiccup where I went, oh God, things are potentially going to go wrong. And then, had a couple injuries, couple periods where I did get sick. Thankfully, I was in Brisbane one of those times, and then getting into Sydney, realizing that I had damaged my ITB and that I had tendonitis in my knees. Realizing, God, this may be the end. I might not be able to continue. Those sorts of moments really, set your heart pounding and questioning what you've done to yourself. I think working around all those sort of, natural disasters, there was quite a lot of fires burning. So making sure that, I was safe, that my partner knew where I was, that, he was great and had called up, rural fire brigades to check, what the conditions of the fires were. But yeah, really, just every day was, we're going to stick to the plan, but if the plan falls apart, then we'll, do the best that we can. So I think a trail of that size, if everything had gone perfectly, I would have been questioning, what gods were looking out for me.
Now, you also mentioned pigs when we first talked. Well, tell us a bit about those.
Yeah, that's right. I had quite a lot of run-ins with feral pigs. It's sort of started on day 3 of the trail in the Daintree. I've went to go and hike up to Roaring Meg, and on my way back down the trail, there was a massive boar there, and it's absolutely scared me. So it was between me and where I'd left my pack, so I didn't have anything on me. Very rookie error. I never made that mistake ever again. Thankfully, I was able to sort of scare it off and sprint down the trail and get the hell out of Dodge. But yeah, lots of run-ins with feral pigs, especially in the Oxley Wild Rivers National Park. I think I saw about 40 a day. And, they're typically around those creeks where you're wanting to get your water or a creek crossing, and they're not afraid of me at all. So spent a lot of time sort of standing there clapping and shouting and throwing rocks and trying to get them to move on. And eventually I did spend, probably 10 hours total just sitting there waiting for pigs to leave the area before I could carry on. So they're definitely not my favorite creatures.
I think that's always the issue, isn't it? I mean, feral animals need water as well, and if there's a limited water supply, they're going to be using the same supplies as you are.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think just making sure that they know you're in the area is one of the most important things. You never want to sort of spook one of those big pigs or even the brumbies. Walking around, clapping and calling out high horse probably feels pretty stupid, but if it's going to keep you safe, then that's what you have to do.
Now, did you mentioned the water filter, but did you have any other epic gear fails on this trip?
Not too many failures. I did have to replace my bedroll. My mattress, it ended up with so many punctures in it that it was more patches than the actual mattress by the end of it. So when I got into Newcastle, I switched it out for a new one. Fortunately, I sort of had gotten a bit tired of waking up every 2 hours on the ground and having to reinflate it. So switched over to something that was a little bit heavier, but a little bit more durable. So, and that lasted me till the end. I think the only other real issues was due to the fact that I lost quite a bit of weight. My pack didn't fit properly anymore. So that was quite difficult. I couldn't tighten the waistband any further. So it did sit on my hip bones, which was quite painful, having to sort of carry that pack right on my hip bones for the last sort of month and a bit of the journey.
Now, that raises another question. After walking nearly 5,000 kilometres, what impacts did this walk have on your body, both positive and negative?
Yeah, I guess I was in the best shape of my life. I was, unbelievably fit and sleeping really well. But I say, I was hungry all the time. I became quite obsessive about food. If I'd managed to get a hold of some phone signal and called my partner, our fridge plays a little song when you open it, and I'd quickly ask him, oh my God, what are you eating? What snacks are you having? Living vicariously that way through his snack choices. I did lose quite a lot of weight. I think around 11 kilos, but, put on a lot of muscle, which was great. And unfortunately, after, doing that many kilometers, that much, elevation gain, and also the dreaded downhills, my knees definitely were shot by the end of it. But, in saying that, I'm just amazed at, what my body was able to do and how much it put up with.
So tell me, did you, you've been back home for, what is it now, just on a month, is it roughly?
Yeah, that's right, just about a month.
Have you put some or all of the weight back on again? Or?
No, I think I put on about 2 kilos, which is kind of nice. It was pretty uncomfortable having, your hip bones and your spine sticking out every time I'd sit down in a chair. You'd be like, oh God, this isn't as comfortable as it used to be. But no, have been quite the couch potato since coming home, and it's been really good to have huge amounts of food for Christmas.
With any trip like this, you were in a lot of remote areas for quite a while, but you were also coming across people in more populous areas. What were your interactions with the people like along the trail?
Yeah, honestly, this trail was made by the people that I met along the way. In doing other through hikes, you sort of meet people here and there. You camp with people for a night who are also, hiking as well. But on this hike, I traveled through a lot of private property, so a lot of cattle stations. And then, even further south, you're meeting people while you're walking who, everybody was so kind. I couldn't believe, the kindness that was extended towards me. People invited me into their homes. They fed me. They gave me a bed to sleep in. They let me take a shower. It was probably more for their benefit than mine. I'm not too sure if they wanted me to sit at their dinner table smelling the way that I did. But people were just so unbelievably kind. The number of people that, pulled over to check that I was okay. You get, people driving by on hiking trails, heading off to their campsites, and they, hand you a beer out the window and tell you you're doing a good job. Those sorts of things really, invigorated you. They really made the day. And I guess, also, I've been able to meet a lot of other people who are doing, a lot of work within the mental health space as well. So a couple incredible people up in Gladstone area who have started walking groups, who really have a focus on being active and the positive impacts that can have on mental health. So I've really built this beautiful tribe around me of people who were just so willing to help me, and, really made, I couldn't have done this journey without them.
We talked about gear previously, and the question that most people want to know is what footwear were you wearing on this hike?
Yeah, so I actually switched out traditional hiking boots for this journey and started with some trail runners. So I went through quite a few pairs. In the beginning, I was wearing some Hokas, and they were, it was like walking on clouds. They were really, really great, but I think our rough Queensland roads sort of shredded them quite a bit. I then changed over to some Topos, which I think are very near my favorite trail runners. They're really lightweight, really sturdy. They've got great grip. And then as I headed into the mountains, I switched over to some ultras. So I really did have, quite a lot of variety in my footwear. I do have to say I did hike a couple days in my Crocs, which I'm not too sure if that counts as hiking footwear, but they worked for those 2 days.
Was that because your shoes had died, or you just felt like doing it?
Yeah, I so had about 40 river crossings to do a day, and after sort of the first day where I really, tried to keep my footwear dry, I just realized, oh well, if I'm walking in the river, I'll just wear my Crocs. That'll be fine. They worked pretty well. I think my feet were sort of, they held out, all right. And they were definitely less, soggy and wrinkly at the end of the day, compared to, wearing wet trail runners all day.
Now, just listening to what you've gone through and talked to there, that raises a couple of other questions. Many snake interactions at all?
To be honest, I thought I would have more. I probably only saw about 10 snakes total the entire time. There was probably more, I just didn't see them. Up in far north Queensland, came across a couple taipans, and then further south, I saw a number of really beautiful pythons, and then really didn't see too many snakes until I got into the Alps. Typically, it was in the morning, and they were just curled up off to the side of the trail, and they weren't too bothersome. Their reactions were quite slow and quite funny to sort of watch as you've spoken to them and said, "Hey, I'm just going to walk past you. Just chill there." And as you've walked past them, about 10 seconds later, you've got the reaction, and they've sort of moved off quite quickly into the bush. But a lot less snakes than I thought I would see.
For this sort of distance and the amount of days you're doing, I must admit, I love hiking solo. I love being by myself, even for long periods. But a lot of people don't tend to like that. They need the human interaction. How did you find spending so much time within your own head?
Yeah, I actually love it. I love hiking solo. I think, when I first started doing it, I was young, I was in my early 20s, and I found it really difficult then because I had to spend so much time with myself, and I hadn't had to do that before. And then over time, I really started falling in love with the amount of time you get to spend, examining, thoughts, like thinking about things that you haven't thought about. I'd often find my mind would just go completely blank. So I'd sort of realize several kilometers have passed and I can't even remember what I was thinking about. So it's sort of really a meditative state that you go into. But yeah, I did spend quite a bit of time listening to podcasts, Australian Hiker included, and, occasionally I'd listen to music, but oftentimes there was so much stuff happening on trail. There's so much bird life, insect life, there's beautiful orchids to be found. There was, interesting things around you that, you don't find yourself, feeling bored or feeling the need for, be on your phone or anything like that, or for, a human interaction. But, again, like I said before, I was very blessed that I had, friends and family come and meet me out on trail. So I did have that interaction pretty regularly.
What advice would you give to people looking to undertake an epic journey of this magnitude?
Planning. Planning is so important. Making sure that where you want to be at the end of each day, making sure that sort of what the terrain is going to be like. I think for myself, I didn't do a heap of hiking training. I looked at, other areas of my body that I needed to strengthen to be able to facilitate this hike. Make sure that you've tried all of your meals before you pack them up into boxes. Make sure that you're happy eating only Mars bars for 100 and something days, whether or not you'd like a different variety of chocolate. Yeah, researching your gear, making sure that the gear fits you. There's people who are really loyal to particular brands. I'm loyal to particular gear. If my gear is, working for me, then that's the gear that I'm going to bring. So finding what works for you, and also listening to your body. I guess for people who are planning this, or they're already on a big through hike, listening to when your body is saying, "Hey, you know what? I've had enough. Like I'm tired. I want to take a break right now." Even if you haven't reached that arbitrary distance or amount of hours hiking that you've said you would. If you have the opportunity to stop somewhere, take a break, have a snack, that always helps your mood. Then, really like tuning in, listening to your body, and, doing what it's telling you to do.
Okay. So one final question. What's your next planned hiking adventure?
Yeah, so I actually don't have a hiking adventure planned next, aside from filling in the sections that I've missed. So doing the coastal walk south of Sydney, and doing some of the other great walks in Queensland to link up those little dots that I have on my map. I'm actually heading off on a sailing adventure next. So a little bit different. Maybe give my legs a little bit of a break. But I'll be sailing to Antarctica next year with my parents. Yeah.
That sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah. Should be pretty incredible.
Okay, so we've been talking with Hannah James about an amazing journey along the East Coast, better known as the Long Way South. Hannah, thanks for taking the time to talk with me and to share this amazing journey with our listeners.
Thank you so much, Tim.
So that was our interview with Hannah James on her journey named The Long Way South. And for me, this has a particular interest in that I would like to do something similar at some stage in the future. Whether I do or not is a different thing, but it's certainly there in my mind. One thing I found really interesting about this was it started off being a walk on the National Trail, formerly the Bicentennial National Trail, and very quickly became, or 1,000 kilometres in, became a choose-your-own adventure because she found that it was a lot of highway walking, and in all honesty, the National Trail was designed first and foremost as a horse riding trail. So as a result, it tended to bypass a lot of national parks that don't allow horses into them.
But also the terrain of different parts of the country that would be perhaps a little bit more difficult for horses, so some of those, narrow single tracks and so on. This is an amazing journey. I have so many thoughts and so many questions. It's like, but so impressive for, anybody, particularly somebody doing it solo, to have achieved.
As part of this trip, Hannah was also raising money for the Black Dog Institute, which is based around mental health. And as I mentioned, there's a link in the show notes. So the funding page is still open. So if you'd like to help out with that and donate, the links are there for you to go through and do that as well. It's one of these sort of things where you either do a trip just for the sake of it and that's it, or you do a trip and you also promote or support something else. And, the choice is really yours. I think there's so many people these days that are doing longer trips and doing it as fundraisers. But certainly, if you're going to be going through and doing a trip and you've got the opportunity, why not? As Hannah mentioned, we did discuss how many kilometres she'd gone through and done on this trip. And originally it was going to be the Bicentennial National Trail, which is just a tiny bit over 5,300 kilometres. And that was certainly her intent, is to cover roughly that sort of distance. But due to fires in part of the trail, and also due to aerial shooting of feral animals, that really pushed her off trail. Now, sometimes you might be able to get around that and sometimes not. But when you're doing a trip of this magnitude, it's really hard to take the purist attitude and say, I'm only going to do what I've planned and nothing else. I think realistically, you've got to come prepared for alternate options, and sometimes you don't get much warning on them as well.
Yeah, she certainly had to make some changes along the way, and I guess that's one of those other aspects about this, that she took it in her stride and was very flexible, I guess, was thinking ahead, and then there was a hell of a lot of planning that had gone into this. And I do have to say that, her partner was the, great silent support. I'm not so sure how silent, but, you can't do these things without the people around you and the contribution that they make. So, kudos to him for being there and supporting her along the way.
Now, I don't know if it actually made the cut for this episode, but one of the comments or one of the discussions I had with Anna was she was saying that because communication was to do with using a Garmin InReach, which means you're sending text messages, and in most cases, she was saying that by the time she sent them, it was received and then a response was provided back, and she received it was normally about a 15-minute turnaround. And she was actually saying to me that at one point she had a bit of an argument with a partner, which is very hard when you're having 15-minute intervals for a response.
There wasn't a lot of fury in that, was there? You have to calm down within that 15 minutes, I'm sure.
But that was to do with when the fires were going on, and she needed to be able to know whether she needed to bypass or get out of there, and which way she needed to go. But that's the one drawback with satellite. It doesn't matter how good it is, there's always a lag time. So even if it's only 5 or 6 minutes, there's always that lag time there.
And what a great use of her drone, though. I mean, that was great thinking to have a drone with you to make sure that, when you were going to step off the trail to find water, that you weren't going to get there and discover there was no water. That, it was a great way to monitor the fire activity in an area and so on. So, that's new technology, or it's not so new now, I guess, but technology that's adding quite a big, important dimension to hiking, but particularly long-distance hiking.
And I must admit, I hadn't thought about putting that to this sort of use. You think, okay, I can see a stock water trough. It's 700 or 800 metres across the paddock. I need water. I'll go and get some, and only to get there and find out it's empty. Being able to put up a drone, shoot the drone across without scaring the stock, obviously, having a look to see what's in there and coming back to say, yep, it's something that's worthwhile going through and visiting. Or the same with rivers. As some of the rivers are dry, being able to put a drone up and go and travel that sort of distance before you make the effort of going there.
Yeah, a bit difficult, I guess, in the national parks, given that you can't have your drone in action in the national parks, but any other place. And there was certainly there's a lot of distance between Cooktown and Healesville to be able to fly a drone, that's for sure.
One thing you would have heard a number of times throughout the recording with Hannah was her relationship with food. And she used the term elevensies, which I haven't heard for so long. It's a bit like lunch and little lunch and late lunch, and then you end up with having 4 or 5 meals where most people will have breakfast, lunch, and dinner with maybe a couple of small stacks. She was saying she lost 11 kilos over the duration of the trip.
That's a lot of weight, isn't it?
It is a lot of weight, and it's interesting. It's very much a biological sort of thing. Women do lose weight, but they tend to lose it at a slower pace. They're more efficient with their food use and their food storage. A man trying to do exactly the same thing probably would have lost twice that and looked like a scarecrow at the end of it. So I think it's the sort of thing that, she was saying that she got sick of porridge by the end of it, and I have found that over the years that I love having overnight oats in the mornings, but you get to a stage where you think, no, I've had enough now, and you just need to change over something else. But when you're on trail for roughly 120 odd days, you're going to get sick of having the same thing over and over again, even though you need food to keep you going. But you've got to make sure that you consider what you're taking with you, that you provide variety, and maybe go off it for a particular food for a couple of weeks and then come back onto it again where you've had a bit of a break from it. But it's a very hard thing to do, and when you're burning the amount of calories you probably would be in that sort of situation. In my case, if I was doing 39 kilometres a day, I'd be burning 5,000 to 8,000 calories a day. And trying to get the calories in is really difficult.
Yeah, you just can't carry that much food in a calorie sense. But what was interesting for me was, her diet must have been still pretty good given she was able to maintain muscle and build muscle. So, it wasn't wasting away. So she was doing some really good things in a nutritional sense for that to happen.
One thing that really did surprise me, and I know Hannah's a bit younger than we are. But
that would be a lot younger.
Yeah, doing 38 to 39 kilometres a day average. Now, she did say she started off a bit slower than that and built up to it.
Not much slower. No, she was talking about 30 to 34.
I don't know if I could maintain that sort of pace, not without giving a fully supported hike. And I suppose it's interesting. It is a big distance. There is no argument on that. But when you think she was walking for 12 to 16 hours a day, that's really 3.5 kilometres at the highest. As a pace is concerned, it's not that much, but physically being able to maintain and keep on walking even at a slower pace for that length of time, you've got to, as she said towards the end of the episode, listen to your body and do what your body needs. Don't push it for the sake of it.
Yeah, and there were times, particularly when water was scarce or in the heat, that she was carrying a lot of water. So she would have had, extra weight and still averaging those kilometres. That's a pretty big effort, and for that alone, she should be congratulated.
I must admit, certainly if I was looking at doing a trip like that, I'd try and carry as little weight as I possibly could. But I'd certainly be looking to see what I could strip out, because the less weight you're carrying of these sort of distances makes a huge difference. It's interesting, she talked about using about 5 pairs of shoes over that sort of distance, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, and almost every brand of trail runner. So that's a good test out, hey?
It is, and I think she mentioned her favourites were the Toppos, and I must admit, if I can get hold of them, I do love the Topo shoes. They are very durable, and they will get that 1,000 to 1,200 kilometre sort of range, and they cope with really hard conditions. But in my case, size 15's hard to pick up, and you really do need to pick whatever it is that's right for you and stay with it where you can, or be willing to change if you all of a sudden can't find things. But I think in my case, if I was going to be doing something like that, I'd do the training and do the effort beforehand, work out exactly what shoe's going to work for me, and buy 5 or 6 pairs and get them mailed through at the same time as the food went as well.
Though Hannah did say that the terrain was different and the conditions were different. So, being adaptable, I think, probably was important, and being able to read what I needed next would have been important too. And, having decided 5 pairs prior to your start probably didn't quite meet that flexibility.
No, and as you said, the northern Queensland roads with the heat were really, really killing the shoes first up. I've used the Hokas and they perform really well, but obviously don't like that particular type of condition. So, you may not get as many kilometres in the first part of the trip in the northern Australia area, and get more later down south.
Now, I've never understood the fascination with Crocs. But to hear her having worn them for a few days through rivers and river crossings and so on, it's a pretty flexible. People say they're comfortable. I'm going to have to find that out now.
Yeah, it was interesting. You think, okay, well, why would you bother? But doing anything up to 40 river crossings a day, as you cross backwards and forwards over the same river, you're going to have wet feet for multiple days, and that's probably not a bad way to go.
Yeah, or you're going to spend your time taking your shoes off and walking and then putting them back on again. And, so that's a lot of time in the day if you're going to do that.
So all up the trip, 176 days with 120 days of on trail. I think she lucked it really well doing it in 2023. It was bad luck for the skiers and the snowboarders. It was probably one of the shortest snow seasons in many, many years. And really by the long weekend in October, when the season officially ends, there was pretty much almost no snow around at all. Mm-hmm. Whereas some years you can get very late and quite heavy snow, and that would have changed the whole trip and maybe pushed her out another 10 or 20 days waiting for the snow to move along. The final thing I'd say through here is she mentioned she had 1 2-week period without phone signal, and that would have been in the remote areas, particularly up north, and it's just what you've got to go through and deal with. But that's why it's so important to have something like a satellite communication device of some sort, some brand, that you can actually get daily contact, just to be able to send a message through at the end of the day saying, I've stopped for the day and that's it. Now, even then, I know I've had trips when I did the Bibbulmun where Jill didn't get a message from me, and it was only because I was in the bottom of a deep gully with a heavy rainstorm and big tree growth that it wasn't getting through. But had I have walked 200 metres further on, it was fine. The signal came back again. But That's the sort of thing your partner at home has got to be prepared for. Okay, didn't receive a message today. Maybe after 2 days I'd be starting to worry. But you've got to have that discussion beforehand and say, I will send a message when I can, and sometimes it may not happen. Okay, so all up, a very amazing trip, and one that, as I said, I've got very much personal interest in this, and I said to Hannah I might have to touch base with her in a few years' time if I do something similar at some future stage.
I did notice that at the beginning, that there was this not so subtle hint that either I was going to be support crew or, a partial hiking buddy. But yes, I'm not going to do it end to end. I can tell you that now.
All right. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. And as I said, if you go to the show notes for this episode, there will be links to Hannah's Instagram page and also her fundraising page, just to be able to go and see some of the images, more than the images we've gone through and published on the website.
And if you can donate to the Black Dog Institute, they do some great work, important work to support people. So if it's within, your opportunity, then please consider that.
Okay, that's all for me. Bye for now.
And bye from me.
As part of this trip, Hannah was also raising dog.
Yeah, and if you can, was it a black dog?
Black dog.
And if you can, the black dog